This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Do you ever have a story that you just can't get out of your head?
One that you play the details of over and over with your friends?
Well, you've come to the right place. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan.
And this is Justice Pending,
a weekly true crime podcast where we discuss tantalizing crimes with more questions than answers.
Well, Mike, welcome to Justice Pending.
Thank you.
I feel like you should be welcoming me because I'm on your turf in the studio here.
Oh, it's okay. We are very lucky to have you. Always enjoyed talking to you outside of the studio as well. So I think that will come across on this, and thank you for coming up here to do this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I never imagined that you and I would be doing a Justice Pending episode because you have some pretty fun podcasts here.
We
at Rogue.
do. I do one called Bois, which is about King of the Hill. We go episode by episode. I print off the entire script and then go through with highlighters and do everybody's voices and the whole thing. And so I like to say that we take about 22 minutes and turn it into about an hour and a half. And so we do that twice a week. And then I do one called Found Sound, where I listen to unlabeled audio cassettes for the first time on the podcast. That one's fun because we're kind of like you. We're looking for a murder.
All right.
Just auditory, And then I do one called Bros, Foes, and Heroes, which is about comic books with Zach Burke.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I was really interested to talk to you about Johnathan Joss.
Mhm.
I couldn't believe when I heard the news, that he had been murdered, and I knew that you had a connection. So I wanted you to be the one to tell our listeners who is Johnathan Joss and what's he best known for?
So Johnathan Joss, two things for me, huge King of the Hill fan and a huge Parks and Rec fan. He was on both of those shows. Parks and Rec, he was the Indian chief that owned the casino, and always gave the white man a bad deal kind of thing. Very funny character. But then King of the Hill, he's John Redcorn, the Indian mystic healer who would heal Dale's wife a couple of times a week. So very funny. He's one of those ancillary characters that just drops in every once in a while, gives a little comic relief, and then moves on. He was very talented at what he did. I did not realize the length of his resume, though. He had been in a ton of stuff. TV, movies, video games, lots of stuff.
I saw that come out too, like True Grit and Tulsa Kings.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
it's
he does
stuff.
have quite the resume, and the tributes are pouring in.
Yeah. We've gotten a lot of those just, because we do the King of the Hill show.
Yeah. Well, as we say on Justice Pending, let me set the scene.
Okay.
So Johnathan Joss was visiting his San Antonio home on June 1st, 2025.
Right.
And this was, an emotionally charged visit for him.
Right.
Because his house had actually burned down.
Mm-hmm.
And that had happened in January. And so he was going back there to check his mail. He was there with his husband, Tristan. And there was something, that really shocked them whenever they got to the house.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So what we've been told is that there was a dog skeleton that 3 of his dogs had perished in the fire. And apparently one of the neighbors pulled the dog skeleton out and put it out. But yeah, it's very weird. It is, and I honestly don't know what happened between that and the lethal shot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there that say it was this or that. I don't know necessarily, not firsthand. I know from what our listeners and watchers have told us, and then anything we've gotten in the kind of the pipeline. One thing that has happened is we've been reached out to by a lot of people that were like adjacent to the show. So somebody that was going out with somebody who was on the show or whatever at the time. And so they would tell their story to us. And it's been fascinating. But it's so sad.
It really
very,
is.
very sad.
And, there was a violent confrontation.
Yeah.
A gun was brandished and Johnathan was shot.
Right.
And, his neighbor was arrested at the scene.
Yeah.
And so Sigfredo Ceja has allegedly admitted to this, said, I shot him to, San Antonio police, and he was charged with first-degree murder. He's now out on bond.
Yeah, I saw that.
House arrest, and there's a pretrial hearing set for August 19th, 2025. Okay. So we won't probably get much more investigative information, until August, I would think.
Yeah, I think that from what I've heard, just exactly like you said, with the exception of the neighbor, basically when the cops showed up, he said, I did it. You know, just like no hesitation, no anything, didn't go on the run. So he obviously, in my mind, that's you feel like you're justified in what you did. Right. Now I'm not saying that he is, but in his mind, I guess he was.
Yeah. So there's this longstanding feud between these neighbors, and it's been, well documented. CNN talked about how there had been over 50 calls, to the police.
That was surprising to me
address.
That I heard that number. That's a lot of calls.
Yeah. And they said sometimes there were multiple in one day.
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, as a crime reporter, I'm going to this fire, this recent fire. And I'm thinking, was this intentionally set? Was this arson?
Right.
Everything that I've seen says that it was not, that it was just accidental fire. Yeah. Propane, if you can believe it.
Yeah, it's very ironic that it was possibly propane. From what I understand or what I was told, the utilities were cut off to the house.
Oh.
And so they moved a gas grill inside to start a fire.
Okay.
And they did. They left to go get something to eat, and then boom, place went up.
Gosh.
Yeah. It's not great.
Yeah, this is just sort of tragedy on top of tragedy here.
It does start to build on itself, and you see the signs of a very troubled individual. You know, that he was not in a great place.
It definitely seems like he had been spiraling, and there's evidence of that.
There's no doubt about that. Yeah.
So, Johnathan's husband has gone on the record, saying that he believes that this was possibly, he strongly believes that it was a homophobic, a hate crime, and has stated that unequivocally. San Antonio police, they initially said that it was not, and now they've come back around, sort of walked that back and said, we will look into that claim, and we're taking it seriously, which I think is important.
I think it's important as well. I don't know that it's going to turn out to be that. From everything I've heard, I understand that maybe slurs were thrown, but I don't know it was because of that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, it's I think, and I guess, in a time that we live, if that happens, if the slurs are thrown, then it becomes that. But again, I don't know, and this is just me saying this, I don't know the intention behind the shot. To me, it sounds more like a troubled neighborhood that had finally given up.
There are a lot of layers to this. I think that we can look at the history and say that this is probably motivated by more than one thing.
I agree. Yeah. We've heard stories of Johnathan being on top of the house in the middle of the night, banging pots and pans.
Yeah.
There's the video out there of him going up and down the street with a pitchfork in his hand. So I don't know. It just seems very like Wild West type.
It does.
Justice or something.
Yeah. And then people would say if they spoke to him about it, he would say he was rehearsing a scene.
Yeah.
And, he was an actor. So there could be some truth to that. But it does get pretty bizarre.
I don't think he was rehearsing a scene, but maybe in his head he was. You know, and that could very well be.
Well, tell me about your connection to this case, the timing of your interview with Johnathan Joss for your podcast.
So as Bois, we were very excited to get press passes to go to the ATX TV Festival in Austin. I had two goals. I wanted to speak to somebody from King of the Hill, actually three. Wanted to speak to somebody from King of the Hill, wanted to see the King of the Hill panel because they were previewing the new episodes and things. And I wanted to talk to John Hamm. Didn't get to talk to John Hamm, but got to see him. It's a cool little festival because it's all about TV.
Yeah.
I was very excited about it because I grew up as a TV kid, and it was just a lot of cool things going on. Plus, it's a festival that kind of weaves the fans closer to the stars than any other type festivals. Because, I mean, you're just rubbing elbows with them, because like we went to a barbecue afterwards presented by Hulu, and all the people from the panel were there. So we went, or I went, and I stayed overnight a couple of days. And don't judge me when I tell you this, but I stayed at the Super 8
Nice.
because I'm cheap.
And they were probably booked out.
It was
a lot of the
well,
hotels too.
Again, I could give you all the excuses in the world, but it comes down to me being cheap. So I stayed at the Super 8, but it was just to sleep, and do some stuff with the footage that I was capturing. We went, had two people from Rogue drive up and go to the King of the Hill panel with me, and that was Friday night. Or Friday late afternoon. And so we got to go in, we got to see the whole thing. When we walked up to the Paramount Theater, Johnathan, okay, let me go back just a little bit. We had reached out to Johnathan a long time ago about coming on the show because we've been doing this show for 4 years. Originally, his management, which I don't know who that was at the time, said $5,000. Which is insane.
Oh my gosh.
That's insane for an interview.
That's like an appearance fee. That's a podcast fee?
Exactly. And so that's, and we were like, okay, thank you very much. And then we just kind of dropped it. When the thing was announced at the ATX TV Festival, Johnathan went on and I have to give it up to Rusty, my co-host, who keeps an eye on all this stuff. He had seen that Johnathan said he was going to be outside of the Paramount because he wasn't invited to this thing. He was going to be outside the Paramount shining shoes like his grandfather did in front of that theater many, many years ago. Obviously, a little bit of a jab to the King of the Hill folks. So Rusty reached out to him again. The fee went down to $225, and we were like, okay, well, we can do that because, that's like buying you a couple of meals, or whatever. So that's great. So we made a deal. We were going to do an interview. He made a video on his way up to Austin because he lives in San Antonio. On his way up to Austin, he took a Greyhound, is what I'm told, which that's weird to me also. It just seems like these people that do all this work should be better taken care of or something. But he made a video announcing that he was coming, thanking Rogue Media, thanking WA and all this stuff. We were very excited. Then when we walk up to the Paramount, he's on the other side of the barricade. And so I go up and I introduce myself, shake his hand and say, look, I'm really looking forward to this. I hope you can get in, and then we can talk tomorrow. It'll be great. Didn't think much about it. We went in, we sat down in the press section, and I felt very out of place because there's people from Texas Monthly behind me talking about how they had interviewed this and that and all this. Anyway, after about 10 minutes, Johnathan and his crew came in and sat about 2 rows in front of us. It was him, his husband, a guy named David the Rapper, who apparently was his management for the evening or something. I don't know. It's weird. And so they came in and they sat in front of us. The panel starts. It's Mike Judge. It's Greg Daniels. It's a few of the voices, Toby Huss, several people up there. And we couldn't be more excited. This is what we've been waiting for, Plus, all I'm thinking is, hey, it's more content for the show, and this is great. And so we watched the panel. About 30-ish minutes into this thing, Johnathan gets up and he just disappears. And we don't know exactly what's going on because we're focused on the panel. I'm just like, hey, look, he left. He goes up to a microphone that's in the aisle. They had set up 2 microphones, one in each aisle in the Paramount so that fans could come up and ask questions.
Right.
The panel went long, and so it looked like they weren't going to get to the audience questions. And so, but here comes Johnathan. He walks up, hat in hand, because he was wearing a cowboy hat. He took his cowboy hat off, and he just stood there at the microphone for a while. You could collectively see the faces on the stage change as they started to see him. I don't know what's gone on in the past. I would love to know, but it's not really my business. So something had happened. And he just stood there and stood there and stood there. And they just kept doing their panel. After a little while, this poor guy who was a volunteer for the festival had to come up and say, Mr. Josh, we're not going to do that. We're going to blah, blah, blah. And so they had a little talk. And then Johnathan leaves that microphone, goes all the way to the front, walks right in front of the stage, then comes up the other aisle and gets it behind the other microphone.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, man, something's going to happen, And everybody just kept going with the exception of Toby Huss. And I got to tell you, Toby Huss is one of my favorites. I love him as a character actor. He shows up in a lot of things. Halt and Catch Fire was one of the best things I've seen him ever be in. And he was just great. Toby finally just had enough, and he was like, hey, it's Johnathan Joss out there in the audience. What you got, Johnathan? And so he was just trying to get it over with, break the tension. Johnathan starts to kind of ramble. He does say the phrase, "My house was burnt down 3 weeks ago because I'm gay." So I don't know if that will come into play at some point, because talking about the homophobic killing or not. And he just kept going. And then he broke into song and started singing about how there's a hole in his pocket where the money should go. Nobody really understands how this thing is going.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it got very, very tense and very weird. But we're not thinking it's violent at this point. It's just weird and intense.
Yeah.
So finally he leaves and everybody just kind of laughs it off or whatever. And I got to say, we have had some comments where the people were like, King of the Hill fans were just laughing at him and blah. That was not the mood in that place at the time. It was, what the hell is going on here?
Kind of like the nervous laughter.
Yes, it was very much a nervous laughter. Yeah. And so he leaves and then the panel concludes and we're like, oh, great. Now we got to interview this guy tomorrow, And I'm thinking, there's two ways I can interview this guy. One is I can say, what the hell happened? What was that? What happened in the past? Or the other way, I can just let him talk. And I'm so glad that we did it that way. We had an interview the next day. Well, number one, I came out in the morning to go get some breakfast because they had nothing there.
No breakfast at the Super 8.
Not a lot at the Super 8 to offer, with the exception of one of those cereal things. But I left and I realized, oh crap, they're in the room right next to me. So it was they were just outside, and I come out and I'm like, please don't talk to me, please don't talk to me. I didn't want to start anything before we have the interview.
Recording.
Yeah. And so finally we get there. We go to a place called Mr. Nice Guys, and they have an adjoining room next door, which is probably twice the size of this room. So like 40 by 40 or something like that, pretty good size room with a stage in it and everything. It's called the Green Room. This is it's a head shop basically, right? So water pipes and, tobacco pipes and things next door. And then you go through the secret door and you get into this green room, which is basically they have a bar over on one side with their bud tenders who serve you weed, which I think is weird, but it's happening. I don't know how they get away with that, but this is basically a place where you could bring your own, or they'll give it to you, or you can buy a drink, or you can do this or whatever. And they have little concerts and they do a lot of stand-up comedy. So cool little place. I got to tell you, for a weed place, everybody was super happy.
I bet.
So met the owner. He showed me a bunch of the stuff. He's a huge King of the Hill fan. It was all going great. We set up all the equipment, waiting for them to show up. Here's the way it was supposed to go. And from my knowledge, it's the way it went. There was a one-man like singer-songwriter that went up and did a few songs. Then a band from Oklahoma went up and did a few songs. And then it was us. Okay. It was me, Rusty, my co-host, and Johnathan. That's it. One table, 3 mics, we're on the stage. So, and then afterwards, John Redcorn's band, Big Fudge Mountain or something like that, is supposed to perform, but it was just him, right?
Okay.
So a cool little event, great for the fans. At the most, they could seat probably 50 people in that room. I would say there was probably 35, 40 people in there. So it was a decent little amount. You know, it was great because we got feedback during the show and stuff. So I went up and I reintroduced myself when he first got there, and I talked to Tristan for a minute. Super nice. And we just talked about the interview. I told him how we were going to go, and real easy. Got up on stage, kind of introduced everything. He came up, and he kind of laid his soul out on this interview. Yeah, it was honestly, now when I say that, there was a lot of rambling, so I did have to kind of correct the course a couple of times, but it wasn't anything terrible. It was just kind of keep on going down the same road or something. But he mentioned many of the things that have now come out, about how his neighbors hate him. He, at one point, I believe, said he burned his house down, which I don't know, you know, again. And then that's when he said that they had drug in a barbecue grill to start a fire in there, and then they left to go get something to eat. Yeah. And then at one point, I think he says he shot his dogs. So I don't know if he did it, if they did it. It was weird. It was very confusing. Yeah. And the feedback that we got after the interview, a lot of our fans were like, thank you for just letting him talk, which again, going back to choosing the way you do the interview, I don't know that I could I could keep doing this if I did it the other way,
Right.
to find out the next day. So anyway, did the interview, cleaned up all the equipment, got out of there. Rusty stayed for a little bit and kind of saw some of the music and stuff. And then I went back to the hotel room because I was just tired. I got all my stuff and I went home. It had been a long weekend and I wanted to just sleep in my own bed and go home. And Super 8 was not, where I wanted to stay. So, I took off. I went home, took all the equipment with me and everything, and then I dropped it off the next day. But everything went great. And after the interview, I'm talking to Johnathan. I'm talking to Tristan about other projects we might could do together. They were in the midst of writing a graphic novel.
Okay.
This story that he had come up with, and that's great because I've got other things you could be on. I'd love for you to be on Bois again. All of this stuff. Honestly, I walked away from that interview, and this is not because the guy perished. I liked him.
Yeah.
We got along, gave him a hug, gave him a handshake at the end, and everything was great. Went home, unpacked all my stuff, and then it was that next day, Rusty texted me and said, "Hey, there's some rumblings on Reddit that maybe Johnathan got shot to death last night." And I was like, "Okay, well, it's Reddit. Let me know if you hear anything else, And then it just starts to unfold. Didn't really get confirmation of it until Monday morning early. And I made a couple of videos literally driving around in my truck when I found out, just to tell people that we already had the interview ready to go and it was scheduled first thing Monday morning. We were not trying to capitalize on anything here. I just wanted them to know that we had a great time, and I was devastated, to hear this because I wanted to do more stuff with him. Plus I just liked the guy.
Yeah.
And so it all finally came out, and then ends up we are the last ones he talked to. We're the last interview he ever gave, which, I've told several people this. It's hard to know how to feel about that because our channel went through the roof.
I'm sure.
But a guy died, you know? It's really hard to deal with. And you can't really be happy for it, but you can't, it's really odd and it's hard to feel.
It's one of those like fate moments where you're like, we had this chance to talk to him and it was our last chance. We didn't know it. And we're glad that we got to talk to him, but gosh, so tragic.
Yeah, it was rough. I did reach out to Tristan afterwards and just checked to make sure everything's good. But I mean, he doesn't know me from anybody, And so I just wanted to let him know that everything was fine with us. I hope he's good. I hope he can take care of everything. If he needs something, to let us know.
Yeah.
And that was really the last I've heard of anybody. Now, we did get reached out to by a bunch of people. Story from Good Morning America. We got TMZ. We got Cracked. All these stories started coming out. And it's great to be mentioned, but again, it's just hard to know how to feel about it.
Terrible reason. Yeah.
It's
No,
tough.
I think working in true crime, I'm often straddling those two emotions where as a storyteller, I'm fascinated by the twists and turns and, what people are capable of.
Yeah.
And then on the other end, I'm like, this is so terrible. And I don't know, like, if am I helping? Am I hurting? But I feel like a responsibility to tell the stories that people can't tell anymore.
Right.
And
that's I guess that's kind of the way I felt, and still do. I want to present him in a light, as a man who had many demons, but was a good guy. At least he was a good guy to me, to that crowd, to everybody I saw him deal with. Even when he got up and did the weird thing at the panel, he still hat in hand, said, "Sir, yes, sir," all that stuff to people on the stage. This is not a guy who had a lot of malicious bones in his body. He wasn't looking to settle a score. I don't know what he was looking for, honestly. It's hard to tell.
It sounds like there's some kind of mental breakdown going on.
I think there was. Yeah.
And, sometimes that stuff's not linear.
Yeah, that's
true. And
true.
so that's what's so hard to understand, because he can have like this great interview with you where he's bearing his soul and, very coherent, and, you can really connect with him. And then on the other end of that, know that, there's just a lot of behavior that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. The funny thing is you had said that the cops got called out 50 times or whatever. I guess if you try to get into his mindset, probably when he got there, things completely got flipped on their head, because you don't really have to think about it until you confront it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the only thing I can guess is that happy-go-lucky guy who was on TV and in movies and stuff, and then you get to this place where your house is burnt down and your dogs are dead and your neighbors all hate you, and that switch just flips.
Yeah, that's a bad place.
It is a bad place. Yeah. A lot of people are there and have been there, and thank God you and I are not there.
Yeah.
You know, that's really all you can do.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on the
Please,
show and for talking about this unbelievable twist that happened. And
it's an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and I know we'll stay tuned both to WA to have the rewatch of King of the Hill and to see what's next in this case for justice for Johnathan Joss.
One thing about Joss, he is in 4 of the new upcoming episodes. They start August 4th. So if anybody really wants to pay tribute to him, watch those episodes and just remember him fondly. You know.
Yeah, I think that's a great message.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining me on another episode of Justice Pending. I'll be back next week with hopefully Susan. You know, it's summer. It's hard to get your regular co-host all the time. So I'm going around doing some guest tours here.
Well, tell Susan I'll take her place anytime she wants.
Yeah, I know, right?
Sure,
you're gunning for her job.
That's right. I'm going to knock that Susan out. That's what I want to do. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much.
All right.
Justice Pending is recorded in Dallas, Texas for Rebel Studios. It's hosted by me, Claire Sanamaw, and Susan Passoni. Our theme music is Bending Truth, licensed at premiumbeat.com. We appreciate all listener feedback. Leave a review wherever you're listening right now, and we might read it on the air.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.